Are you a crappy partner, crappy wife, crappy husband, crappy mate? This podcast is for you. Give yourself the gift of self-awareness. Learn new skills. Take the time to assess your partnership, marriage, relationship, etc. So how are we going to do this? Start by taking the Crappy Mate quiz. The quiz can be found on our website, www.crappymate.com, on Pinterest, Crappy Mate, Instagram and Facebook, Crappy Mate Podcast. We will dedicate episodes to discussing the quiz topics. In further episodes, we will be exploring common problems, the speed bumps that occur in relationships. Also, we will introduce time-tested skills and helpful hints to enhance your relationship, and we invite you, our listeners, to contribute your thoughts, questions, or concerns regarding relationships. Welcome to the Crappy Mate Podcast. I'm Dr. Richard Vance Barnes, MD. I'm a board-certified general psychiatrist with 25 plus years in psychiatry. I have treated patients in a variety of settings, both inpatient units, outpatient units, partial hospitalization units, as well as detoxification programs and rehabilitation programs. And I've had a private practice for many, many years.
And I'm Barbara Quaid, a marriage and family therapist. I also have over 25 years experience working with families, individuals, and couples. And my life as a therapist has been both humbling and joyful. Before we get started, I'd just like to talk about our disclaimer. The Crappy Mate podcast is designed to be a useful tool to help individuals and couples have happier and healthier relationships. This podcast is not a substitute for individual or couples therapy, and as always, relationships need to be safe. Seek professional help as needed.
The Crappy Mate podcast was developed out of hearing years and years of stories and accounts from patients in therapy about their mates and themselves actually being crappy mates and poorly behaving within the relationship. And so this concept was then developed into a podcast of how can we help people to actually improve upon their relationships.
And so in order to do this, we developed a quiz. And the quiz, we really thought about some concepts that we thought were important in a relationship. And so the Crappy Mate quiz ended up being a 10-question self-scoring assessment that can be found on our Facebook page. And our Facebook page is aptly named the Crappy Mate Podcast. And along with the quiz, you will find a glossary with the terms we used both in the podcast and on the quiz. And this is so we can all be on the same page. Now, to score the quiz, you will read each question carefully and then ask yourself, do I do this almost always, sometimes, or almost never? And when we thought about this, the scoring is like this. Almost always is worth 3 points. Sometimes 2 points. And almost never 1 point. So once you have your total points, you add them up. And a score of 10 to 17 clearly indicates that one needs improvement. A score of 17 to 24, one has a degree of awareness, but improvement can still be beneficial. And a score of 24 to 30, one is aware, insightful, and acting in a positive manner as it pertains to the relationship.
Welcome to the Crappy Mate Podcast. In today's episode, we will continue to talk about finding that mate, that significant other, that partner that you desire. And, Barbara, I just wanted to kind of review again and talk about the technique that I use when I'm in my office with my patients. And I call it finding the perfect mate with my patients. And basically, it's an exercise in which they have to list out about 5 or 6 qualities of what they would want in that mate, that perfect mate, as I call it at my office. And I act as a recorder and I list all of the qualities and then I read them back to my patient. And eventually what has to happen is the patient has to state out loud to the universe, actually, that they are willing and they're ready to receive this perfect mate after they've stated out loud what those qualities are that they want the mate to have.
You know, Dr. B, our listeners can do this on their own in the privacy of their own home. And that would be just listing those, putting them somewhere where you're looking at them, thinking about them, and then asking the universe to telling them that you're ready to receive this kind of a mate. Good idea.
Yeah. And I think it's something that I'm not quite certain why it does work. I have to admit that. However, invariably between 6 months and one case took up to 2 years, every single person that I've done this exercise with has found that mate.
That's really it. You've got a good track record. So I just want to go through and, we do have a Crappy Mate assessment tool. And our assessment tool can be found on our website, which is www.crappymate.com. And on that assessment tool, we have 10 items that we think are really important when you're talking with your mate. And those include things like honesty, consideration, financial responsibility, and others. So that's a good starting point, I think, just to be thinking about what you want in a mate.
It's interesting because when you think about my exercise and you think about finding that mate, you have to really sit down and you have to really search your consciousness and maybe your subconscious to find out what it is that you need and that you really do desire. But I think it's important that you are listing these things out and you're writing them down, because there's an amount of intention that goes along with it once you do that. But, let me share with our listeners my own experiences regarding this, finding the mate, finding that partner. It began for me really after coming home from a vacation with my second wife. And our listeners know that I'm on wife number 3 now at this point. But it was after my vacation with my second wife that I realized that I was really quite miserable and quite unhappy, and that I really needed to make a change in terms of the relationship. And so, flying back from the vacation, I just sat back and I began to really I tried to manifest really and think about what it was I would want in this next person, this next partner, mate. And so the first thing that came to my mind, quite honestly, was, is this person going to be caring and sensitive? Because I felt as though I did not have that in my marriage. And so that was one of the qualities that I really honed in on, that I wanted this next person, this next mate, next significant other to actually possess.
Any other qualities that you were looking for at that time?
Well, other qualities, yes, there were a number, but another quality was I really wanted that person to be very much geared towards spirituality, and that they would use spirituality to help them through uncertainty and through times when times were difficult. And so I would say that is the second quality that I really, really honed in on, that I wanted this next mate, now my third wife, I wanted her to possess.
For me, it was pretty cliche. And even though I wasn't articulating it, I was looking for someone who was a lot like my father. And my father, I thought, possessed a lot of qualities that I liked. One, he really loved the out of doors. I love the out of doors. He also had a really funny sense of humor, didn't take life too seriously. And, he was so full of, bad dad jokes, but I loved it. I loved that, just how he took life lightly. And I loved that part of him. And he was a family man and consistent and had those kinds of qualities that I liked and looked for.
No, those are wonderful qualities, and in particular, the sense of humor to me is a really well-developed trait that people will have, and well-developed psychological defense is humor. But it's humor that incorporates the ability to laugh at yourself and to not take yourself too seriously and to not look at life in terms of black or white or extremes versus non-extremes.
So, Dr. B, I just wanted to go through some of our checklist here. And one of the things that we thought was really important was maturity. And when I talk about maturity, it's being able to handle your life, to be consistent, to be responsible, those kinds of things. And then emotional intelligence. And that is, caring about others, caring about how they feel, and also recognizing your own emotions and understanding them. And then how does the other person communicate? Communication is usually a huge piece when looking for a mate. I also look at things like, do they demonstrate humility? Are they able to be kind and not arrogant? So that I think is important. And I think once you get to know somebody, you want to see how do they interact with their family. And with that, you want to find out more about family, your family and the other's family. So you want to know about trauma, past and present, even historical trauma. You probably want to know a little bit about their medical history, genetic history. And then you want to know, how do they interact in the family? How do they treat men? How do they treat women in the family? Do they have a spirituality? And is your spirituality compatible? Possibly, are you politically compatible? Also, I think you want to find out, how do you handle anger? Because that can be a big thing in families. One person, they just blow up and they're done, and others simmer. How do they handle anger in relationships? You want to know, do they care about others, how inclusive or exclusive they are with others that are different than them? And then I think an important one is, would I be accepted by my partner's family? Would I be accepted into their family?
Those are actually really wonderful traits to look for in a mate. In particular, I just want to talk about the acceptability and being able to be accepted within a family, because I think that is something that I think really can set the stage for where the relationship's going to go as time goes on. Because as you become more and more involved with an individual, you're going to take on their family as well. And especially once you are married, that becomes your family as well. So you really want to make sure that you're comfortable within that family or within that family setting, and that they are comfortable with you and that they are accepting of you. And quite often you'll know that really early on as you meet people and as you spend time around folks.
And like we said before, this list is not definitive. You're going to have your own special qualities that you're going to be looking for and want in a partner. So just take this as a roadmap. And today we have some helpful hints for you. And so number one is, write a list of qualities you desire in a mate. And we talked about writing it down is important because it's concrete. You can look at it. You can think about it. And number two, put the list somewhere you can see and review. So you're not only looking at it, you're thinking about it. Number three, be aware of others who display qualities that you are seeking. So look at other people that you admire and see how they live life. And number four, write a list of your own admirable qualities. I think that's really quite important, because if we're asking someone else to have qualities, we need to have them ourselves. And number five, practice asking the universe to provide the mate who has the qualities you desire.
Thank you for that, Barbara. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in today. And I hope that this episode helps people to find that mate, or to at least begin to formalize what it is that they would want most in a partner. Thank you again for tuning in to the Crappy Mate podcast, and please stay tuned to future episodes. In closing the podcast today, I just want to remind our listeners of our disclaimer. The Crappy Mate podcast is designed to be a useful tool to help individuals and couples have happier and healthier relationships. This podcast is not a substitute for individual or couples therapy. And as always, relationships need to be safe. Seek professional help as needed.
Thank you for listening to the Crappy Mate podcast. We invite you to submit comments, questions, and/or concerns about today's podcast, or give us feedback on relationship topics you'd like to hear covered. We encourage you to try our helpful hints. Give these a go, try them on for size. Remember, you can follow us on our Facebook and Instagram pages under the Crappy Mate podcast. Our website is www.crappymate.com. And please be sure to subscribe. Thank you for listening.